You heard a human voice before you had ears to understand it. Before your first breath, before your first cry, you already knew your mother's voice. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine going years, maybe your whole life, without ever hearing a human voice again. No name, no hello, no goodbye. Scientists say your brain wouldn't just feel lonely, it would start to physically unravel. This matters more than you realize. Every single day you use your voice without even noticing it. You say good morning to a stranger in an elevator. You laugh at a voice note a friend sends you at midnight. You call your mom for no reason, just to hear that she's okay. And yet, most of your conversations today happen through text, not voice. You've traded calls for typed bubbles on a screen. Voice isn't just communication, though. It's proof that you exist to someone else, right now, in real time. Take that away completely, and something ancient in your brain quietly starts asking a question it was never designed to face. Am I even still here, if no one ever answers? Let's start where this all begins, before you were even born. By around week 25 inside the womb, your ears were already working. You could hear your mother's heartbeat, the rumble of her stomach, and her voice, muffled through fluid and skin like a phone call underwater. Researchers later tested this. They played newborns 2 recordings, a stranger's voice and their own mother's. The babies sucked harder on a pacifier whenever it triggered their mother's voice. They chose her, specifically her, before they could even focus their eyes on her face. That's how deep this wiring runs. It starts before memory, before language, before you had any choice in the matter. But here's where the story turns darker. What happens when that voice never actually arrives? That need for a responding voice doesn't take years to reveal itself, it shows up in minutes. In a famous experiment, a parent plays normally with their baby, smiling, talking, responding to every little sound. Then, on cue, the parent's face suddenly goes blank and silent. No voice, no expression, nothing. Within about 2 minutes, most babies fall apart. They smile harder, trying to restart the voice. They point, they reach, they coo louder. When nothing comes back, they cry, twist away, and some even shut down completely. Researchers call it the still face effect, and it proves something unsettling. A baby doesn't just want a voice nearby, it expects that voice to answer, and panics the moment it doesn't. In the early 1970s, a girl was discovered in Los Angeles who had barely heard a human voice speak to her in over a decade. Researchers gave her the name Jeannie. Her own parents had kept her isolated in near total silence, strapped to a chair, punished for making any sound at all. When specialists finally reached her, she was 13 years old. They spent years patiently teaching her words. She learned nouns fast. She could name a cup, a dog, a color, but she never learned to string those words into a real, flowing sentence. Scientists call this the critical period for language. Miss that window of hearing voices as a small child, and the door to full language partly closes, sometimes forever. Her brain had the wiring ready, it simply never received the signal in time. And that raises an even more uncomfortable question about children who are never actually spoken to at all. In Romania, through the 1980s, thousands of children grew up crowded into state orphanages, fed on schedule, clothed, but almost never spoken to, rarely held, rarely answered. Years later, researchers scanned their brains. The images showed something startling. The regions tied to language and emotional processing looked measurably less active, almost visibly darker, compared to children who grew up hearing normal daily conversation. Silence didn't just delay these children, it physically reshaped the architecture of their brains. And the children adopted into talking, responsive homes before age 2 recovered dramatically more than the ones adopted later. Timing, it turns out, decided almost everything. But children are far from the only ones who break under total silence. Take solitary confinement. Put a grown adult alone in a cell, with no voice ever answering theirs, and the mind starts slipping within days, not years. The United Nations set 15 consecutive days as the legal threshold, the point where prolonged isolation is officially classified as psychological torture. Inmates describe hearing voices that were never there. Some talk to the walls, just to hear any voice at all, even their own. Some genuinely forget what their own name sounds like spoken out loud. It seems the human brain needs a voice arriving from outside itself, or eventually it starts manufacturing one to fill the gap. And somehow, remarkably, some people choose a version of this life on purpose. Christopher Knight lived completely alone in the Maine woods for 27 straight years. He lit no fires, spoke to no one, and quietly stole supplies from nearby cabins just to survive each winter. When police finally caught him in 2013, he could barely hold a normal conversation. His own voice sounded strange to him, rusty and unfamiliar, like an instrument nobody had touched in decades. He later said the silence became so total that a single snapping twig felt louder to him than a scream would to anyone else. He wasn't unhappy out there, he insisted, not exactly, but he also admitted he'd forgotten how to make small talk, how to answer a simple question without overthinking every word. 27 years without a human voice had quietly rewired what silence itself even meant inside his head. But you don't need a forest to test this effect. Space does the exact same thing. Astronauts on long missions get scheduled calls home, and researchers noticed those calls were never really about the information exchanged. NASA psychologists found that hearing one familiar voice, even for 2 rushed minutes, reset something inside the brain that pure text messages simply cannot reach. Crews aboard the International Space Station reported that written messages from family felt strangely hollow compared to a real voice, even a delayed, glitchy one traveling millions of miles through space. The voice itself carried something that words on a glowing screen never could replicate. Distance was never really the core problem up there. Silence was. Even in a tin can orbiting the planet, a voice was the one thing that kept people tethered to being human. There's an even faster version of this effect, one that doesn't take years or decades at all. Put a person inside a sensory deprivation tank, floating in total darkness and silence, and within a matter of hours, some begin hearing voices that were never spoken. Researchers studying isolation chambers found the brain doesn't tolerate a true absence of voice for long. When no real voice arrives, it starts generating its own, whispers, mumbles, sometimes full conversations that feel completely real. Total silence, it turns out, is not empty. Your brain simply refuses to leave that space blank. But maybe the strangest twist is what a voice does to your actual body chemistry, not just your mind. Researchers once stressed out a group of young girls with a hard math test in front of strangers, then split them into 2 groups. One group got comfort from their mom over a phone call. The other got comfort through text messages, typed word for word the same. Only the phone call group showed a real drop in stress hormones and a rise in oxytocin, the same chemical released during a hug. The texting group got almost nothing chemically, even reading identical loving words. Your body, it seems, can tell the difference between a voice and its shadow. And here's the number that ties every single one of these stories together. Researchers led by psychologist Julianne Holt-Lundstad reviewed data pulled from over 300,000 people across dozens of studies. Chronic loneliness, the kind built slowly from years without real voice contact, raised the risk of early death by roughly the same amount as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Not poor diet, not lack of exercise. Silence, in the absence of a voice ever answering yours, is measurably that dangerous to an ordinary human body. To put that in perspective, it's a bigger risk factor than obesity and roughly on par with alcohol abuse. Your body, quite literally, was built expecting someone to reply, and it keeps score even when your mind insists it's fine being alone. So maybe the scariest part of this was never the silence itself. It's how fast your brain notices the moment it's gone, and how much of your entire well-being quietly depends on someone simply answering back. Not a like, not a read receipt, an actual voice, saying your name out loud. Next time a stranger says good morning to you, notice how automatic your reply is. That small throwaway response is actually decades of survival instinct, quietly hiding inside one tiny word. It's honestly wild that something this basic, a voice saying your name, quietly runs in the background of your entire life, and you almost never stop to notice it. Nobody really talks about this until they lose it, a bad breakup, an empty apartment, a parent who's gone. Then suddenly the silence has a weight you can actually feel.